I'm happy to be talking with Stephanie Simoes, a fellow thinker, communicator, and educator. Stephanie is the founder of Critikid.com, a website that teaches children how to rationally analyze information, arguments, and even their own thought processes through videos and activities. And you can find her work on Instagram and Facebook as Critikid. I think it's nice because we've been in contact for almost a year now. We've been sharing emails with each other and even appeared on a collaboration together where we created 2 reels around the DNA Day in the US, which was a quite fun experience for me at least. But we never met face to face, so it's pretty cool to finally, even if it's not in real life, at least to be talking like this. If I'm not mistaken, you have quite a unique experience where you've been moving across the world, teaching children how to think critically, and now you've started your own business in that same spirit. And I guess I would like to learn more about this project, how it occurred to you, the process from the first idea until now, what you're doing right now.
Sure. So Critikid.com is actually pretty new. I just released it in December of 2023. But I had the idea brewing for a while because I'm an online science teacher. But I was always trying to incorporate a little bit of critical thinking into my classes, and I was looking for resources specifically for kids. And I was struggling to find very many resources. So I've had it in the back of my head for years that it's something I want to do. And the other thing I've been doing besides teaching science online is making educational videos for kids, just about a variety of nonfiction topics. So then at some point last year, in the spring or the summer, I got the idea, well, why don't I just make a critical thinking website with videos, since I had learned how to make videos for kids. And it's expanded now a little bit beyond videos. I've got worksheets and lesson plans and interactive online quizzes. But yeah, that's how the idea started, just teaching kids a little bit of critical thinking, like logical fallacies, stuff like that, in my classes. And I saw that they really loved it. So I wondered, why isn't there more of an emphasis on teaching this stuff to kids? Because they can understand it, they like it, they think it's funny to, see the mistakes that even adults can make. And you tell them like really kind of exaggerated, ridiculous stories, which entertains them. So the first course I made was about logical fallacies. But now I've got all sorts of other ideas. I've made a course about symbolic logic. I'd like to do one about cognitive biases. And I'm working on one right now about statistics.
Quite some advanced knowledge for children, and but I guess at a very basic level to lure them into the world of critical thinking.
Yeah, and in the process of making this website, I have come across some critical thinking resources for children. And I can share those with you after if you want to put them maybe in the video description or something like that. There's some books and some interesting websites.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So I have because we usually talk, both you and I and other people, we talk about critical thinking, improving critical thinking. We learn about critical thinking. I come across quite some definitions of critical thinking. So some people have courses on critical thinking, which is very basic, about how to use it in the workspace, in the office, and other people think about it more at philosophical level. Do you have some type of definition that you like to lean towards in terms of critical thinking? How would you define critical thinking?
You're right. You find different definitions everywhere. I have a blog post on my site answering that question, actually, by John Guy. So that's, quite a long answer to this question. But the simplest answer I give is that critical thinking is careful thinking. So it means thinking where you go beyond your immediate intuitive judgments about things to think about things more carefully. So this requires recognizing our biases, how our biases might affect our judgments, recognizing logical fallacies when other people make them in arguments or when we're about to make them too. Sometimes we make them without even realizing. And another important part of critical thinking that I'm starting to focus on more is science literacy, because I'm coming to see that, and I'm realizing it wasn't really taught in school. There's a lack of knowledge about, firstly, what science is, how to understand data and how to interpret data, how to judge the quality of research. Just because a study exists on something doesn't mean that that conclusion is necessarily true, the conclusion of the study, right? Maybe it has never been replicated. Maybe it was a small study. Maybe it was only performed on animals. And I did play a fun game with myself where I was trying to prove both sides of various arguments on PubMed. So I tried to prove that kombucha is healthy and everyone should drink it, and then to prove that it's dangerous and no one should drink it. And you can find articles for both. You can find articles for both sides of just about everything, it seems, on PubMed because it's a repository. So I've noticed people these days just citing things because it's found on PubMed, but I don't think they're often reading the study or looking at other studies that might be related. So understanding, I guess, research skills and science literacy, I'm coming to see is very, very important. So I would include that under the umbrella of critical thinking as well. But yeah, to put it most simply, I would say it's careful thinking. And it's really about communication too, communicating not only with others, but with ourselves, like in communicating clearly in our own thought processes.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it resonates a lot with my approach to critical thinking as well. And you're completely right. You can always play some type of switch side debating approach when you enter PubMed, and also media in general. You will always find two sides of the same coin, and it's important to understand also how we approach this type of problems. And as you mentioned, I had also a similar experience during school, that we don't explicitly learn about the can we call it the meta knowledge about science, for example. So we learn about science, we learn about the different reactions or processes in biology and chemistry and all that, but we never really learned the concept of science, the philosophy of science. And I think in that aspect we might agree in the fact that we might benefit quite a lot from learning also how it works, not only that it works, but how it works.
I agree.
For myself, when I'm trying to narrow this critical thinking, and it's related to my previous question, like I said, you find a lot of definitions. If you think it's relevant as well, I also like to know a little bit your opinion of different types of critical thinking, because if there are different levels, if you feel that there are different levels of critical thinking, we find, for example, independent thinking, rational thinking, analytical thinking, healthy skepticism, general critical thinking, topical critical thinking. Is there a way of including or excluding or categorizing this type of definition? I know it's a very complicated question, and there is not a straightforward answer to it, but is this something that you have put some thought into?
Yeah, so I think there are lots of different, I guess I would call them aspects of critical thinking, more than levels maybe. But they're somewhat related. Like, for example, learning about formal logic, symbolic logic. This can help you to construct rational arguments and also to evaluate other arguments. This is linked to knowing logical fallacies, which sometimes people call informal fallacies. But sometimes you can actually see the informal fallacies, how they can show up in formal logic, if you know about formal or symbolic logic, which is, I should mention, it's when you use like letters and symbols to represent arguments somewhat mathematically. So these are two different but somewhat related areas of critical thinking. And then the cognitive biases, these are systematic mistakes in thinking. A lot of these overlap with logical fallacies too, like the sunk cost fallacy, which I'll explain briefly, is when you don't want to give up on something that's showing itself to be very unlikely to pay off just because you've invested so much in it already, and you don't want your investment to be wasted, that you'd stick with it even if it might mean losing more, even if it's irrational to stick, most likely unlikely to pay off, so therefore irrational to stick with it. So this is usually talked about as a logical fallacy. If you're making an argument like we should keep doing this because we've already put so much into it, but you can see how it's also a cognitive bias, right? It's also a mistake in your thinking, especially it's like you're making a bad argument in your head. So I think we can sometimes think of biases as logical fallacies in our own minds. And you mentioned skepticism. Yeah, I would say that's the foundation of science and of critical thinking. And I don't think critical thinking and science can be separated either. By skepticism, though, I should explain, and I'm sure you know, but just for your audience, I mean not accepting claims without evidence. I don't mean doubting everything, doubting all the experts, because that's when you get into things like, I don't know, flat Earth conspiracy and stuff like that. So by skepticism, I just mean requiring evidence before you accept claims. I think this is the really common thing that underlies all of critical thinking and science is skepticism.
I think it's Carl Sagan. He talks about it as healthy skepticism, because skepticism as a philosophy can be very extreme and
Yeah,
nonsensical in a way. But
yeah,
healthy
yeah,
skepticism, where you approach things with a healthy, skeptical mind.
yeah. So, I mean, even though I'll make different courses on my site, like this is the logical fallacy course, this is the symbolic logic course, this is the statistics course. They're all kind of interconnected and support each other in some ways. So the topic that I think is suitable for younger kids. Now, I haven't made anything for anyone under 8 years old because I don't have experience with that age range at all. My experience is basically age 8 and up. So I would like to bring in another teacher to cover something for that age range. But for the 8, 9, 10-year age range, I think logical fallacies are perfect because that's when you can use stories. And stories, helps kids remember, it helps keep them interested. And they can then make connections with their lives when they see examples of people. So when I say stories, I mean like a story where someone commits a fallacy. And that's how I've structured the fallacy detectors course on my site. It's a science fiction adventure where in each episode, one of the characters commits a logical fallacy and then they learn about their mistake. So yeah, fallacies I would say can be taught to age 8 and up. And then the symbolic logic is a little bit tougher. I mean, you could introduce younger kids to some of the symbols, but that I teach to ages 13 and up. So I would say that's the more advanced part of critical thinking. I mean, most people I didn't learn it until university. I think most people don't learn it at all, right? If they don't take a philosophy course in university, you don't learn it. But I think teenagers can learn it, like ages 13 and up. I don't see any reason not to be teaching it in high school. I mean, that's another issue, but I don't know why this stuff isn't taught throughout school. Fallacies, biases, like you mentioned, how science works is not often taught in science class, and logic.
Yeah, I think also that story, this is something that I've discovered more and more as a science communicator, how stories, it doesn't apply only to children, but even adults. We love stories, and this is how
Yeah,
things kind of get ingrained because
Yeah.
we're passionate about stories. I'm not saying most people do, but we have many intelligent people who don't know how to provide that information to people because they
Hmm.
lack the ability to tell stories,
Yeah.
which I don't think is 100% straightforward. I think that requires some practice, and I think it's nice that you have been able to combine it with cartoons and stories and to get the children involved with this type of thinking. And something that occurred to me often when we learn, at least as adult, as soon as you learn something like how people commit fallacies and have biases, and then or one example, one of my videos is and blog post is about the Dunning-Kruger effect. As soon as people learn about it, they learn to point fingers and say that that person is suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect or that
Yeah.
person committed a fallacy. How do you approach it by at the same time uh, creating some type of respectful environment where we understand that other people might not have the same point of view as we do. Other people might commit fallacy, but I can also commit a fallacy, and I probably do all the time.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of process that you use to ensure that this type of thinking also occurs?
Yeah. So I think that I do in fallacy detectors give some tips on what you can do if you notice someone um, committing this fallacy. I would say, from what I've seen in real life, because I've had some people in the comments section of some of my social media posts getting into arguments where they're just listing each other's fallacies back and forth, and it doesn't seem to be very productive. So that's one possible downside, I guess, of knowing all the fallacies. It doesn't necessarily lead to a productive argument if you're just pointing out the other people's fallacies. Firstly, because a lot of people don't know what the fallacies are by name. So that's kind of meaningless to them if you're saying, oh, what you said is the tu quoque fallacy. Probably the person won't even know what that means. So what's the point other than it? I mean, it does come off as a little bit arrogant or something like this. I'll explain what the tu quoque fallacy is. That's when it's also called appeal to hypocrisy. So that's if someone asks you, can you wash your dishes and not leave them in the sink? And the person replies back, well, you always leave your clothes on the floor. That doesn't mean the original request to wash the dishes is not an appropriate thing to ask. It's just you have another thing to talk about after. So that would be the tu quoque fallacy, responding like, well, you do this other thing that's similar. So if someone does this to you in life, say, like you ask someone to wash their dishes and then they say, well, you leave your clothes on the ground. I don't think you should say, oh, that's tu quoque fallacy. You should say, okay, yes, you have a complaint too. Let's focus on my issue first that I brought up, and then we'll talk about your issue later. If you recognize they've committed this fallacy, you don't let it steer the conversation off track, because that's what it does, right? Then you start talking about this other topic that kind of seems related, but you haven't resolved the first thing. So I think it's good to recognize the fallacies, not necessarily call them out by name, unless maybe you're talking to someone who knows the fallacy and could appreciate it. But I think, yeah, you can just try to steer the conversation back on track in a way that will make sense to your conversational partner and not confuse them.
Nobody likes to be pointed out about their flaws,
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear that they have committed a fallacy or a flawed argument.
Something I heard Dan Ariely say that stuck in my mind was something like, what is it that you're really trying to achieve? And what's the best way to achieve that? Which sounds like such a simple, obvious question, but sometimes I think we forget what we're really trying to achieve and what the best way is to achieve that. So we're in a conversation with someone, we're trying to achieve some sort of mutual understanding, even in a debate where or like something that's more of an argument, we're really in a way on the same side, unless it's like, a sports debate, competitive debate. But in a conversation, you want to work together to understand each other or to figure something out, even if you're on different sides, share points of view. And the problem with fallacies is they make it really hard to do that. They keep steering conversations off track. But then just pointing out all the fallacies might not help either. So if you keep in mind what the point of the conversation is, what you're really trying to achieve, I think that can help you to steer the conversation in a productive direction.
It's also a sound approach to discussions, and also there are different aims. Like I think you mentioned as well. Do we want to have a discussion where we learn from each other? Do we want to have a debate where we convince our own audience that we are the strongest one, or our own audience that we are right, or maybe attract other people from a different camp to our side?
Yeah.
That's a different approach than having a conversation where you're trying to learn
Yeah.
more about the topic. Do you think that children can learn to approach this type of conversations and arguments in a sound way, or is it something that comes later in the development of our thinking?
No, I think they can. I think in some cases they're actually learning the opposite. Like from adults, they're learning how to commit fallacies to win. Some fallacies, I think, are things you need to learn. They're like strategies or tactics for winning arguments, so, or they might see, oh, they get their way if they use this fallacy. So I think having, adults around them that understand critical thinking too, and understand fallacies to help guide them is really important. So that is one thing I recommend strongly to all parents who want to know how to teach their kids critical thinking. You need to learn it yourself too, because we weren't taught this stuff in school. I don't think any of us were taught about this kind of stuff in school. But there's lots of resources out there for adults. I can also give you some of those after if you want to put in the description.
Definitely.
For parents, or for all adults, not just parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of your work also, it feels that you're approaching teaching children how to think critically, but at the same time it attracts a lot of adults as well, because it's a very without acknowledging it, we also prefer a little bit of a digested kind of maybe a little bit more pedagogical approach to learning something new. So maybe we feel embarrassed as adults, but yeah, I like to watch a cartoon and learn a little bit more about the immune system or whatever, or in your case, critical thinking.
Yeah.
And then I say that it is for because I want to know how to teach my nephew how to think critically, but no, actually it's for myself.
Yeah, I have surprisingly some with their kids and some even just on their own for fun. One thing I want to clarify is that I don't think like all fallacies and biases are learned. A lot of our biases, it's just where it's actually more natural, and you can see the evolutionary reasons for them. Like, for example, a tendency to overestimate the distance from a cliff to the ground if you're looking over the edge. Like they've tested this, and they find that humans tend to guess it's farther than it actually is, and you can see the evolutionary reason for this. Your body doesn't want you to jump unless you really, really have to, right? And risk injuring yourself. So like we're always making little mistakes, and the mistakes are often to keep us safe. But it's important to be able to recognize these, because one of those mistakes might be distrust of new things, unfamiliar people, which you can understand how this could have kept us safe in the past, but also, it could possibly lead to something like xenophobia or problems that we need to make effort to overcome. So, but I don't see why kids can't learn that from quite a young age, in simple terms.
And what we see quite a lot, we've probably seen it for quite a long time, but right now it's very pronounce is the tribalism that we see in media,
Yep.
and also with the, if we're coming back to science, we have the pandemic issues where people quickly chose a camp over another, whether it was the pro-vaccine camp or anti-vaccine camp, and then you had here
Yeah.
almost dogmatically to any type of reasoning that comes from either of those camps, depending on which one you belong to,
Yeah.
and you cannot see the other people's ideas, that there might be some kind of middle ground as well, or some type of ideas that don't belong to the camps per se, but now by default just ended up in your camp or the other person's camp.
Yeah. That's quite a difficult one, and a common one, a difficult one to overcome, I think. Um, and yeah, it's a good example because you can also see the evolutionary reasons for this, for belonging to a tribe. We had to in the past.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. No,
Yeah.
so there is both good and bad in it, because the support that you get from a team or a organization, or it's invaluable. You gain a lot of experience from it, but at the same time you have to be careful so that you don't end up in some type of dogmatic thinking just to follow this camp. So this is
Yeah.
indeed, it's a tricky balance. Talking about education, so I grew up in Sweden.
Mhm.
And I was lucky. We have a lot of flaws in our educational system, but I consider myself lucky in a way, because I feel that since a kid, since I was a child until my university years and beyond, I I've received the opportunity to learn about critical thinking through, you know, uh, problem-based learning, independent thinking, through being sent away, like to research your topic and come back and present it in front of opponents. It helped me a lot in being able to formulate my own thoughts and being realistic with the knowledge that I gather. How do you see basically this type of approaches to teaching critical thinking? Is it possible for you with your project to create independent critical thinking, analytical thinking through this type of projects?
Yeah.
How do we solve that in an era where much of the communication and education is done online?
Yeah. So actually, something I do want to add someday to Critikid, I'm not sure when, might be a while, is a social media simulator where kids can practice debating certain topics, kid appropriate, but also a little bit controversial topics, in a respectful, rational way. Um, so my idea is, it's kind of like, when pilots will do simulators to get ready before flying the actual plane that they could crash, kids get to practice in this sort of environment that would be really moderated. Um, like they wouldn't be able to post freely. I would need to check all the comments before letting them be posted. Unlike real social media where, you just post and it's up and anything's there. So it would be like a really safe environment for them to get ready for social media comment sections. So I'd love to do that someday. That's one way. Another, I do have in my fallacy detectors course where I ask kids to write their own stories where a character commits a logical fallacy, or they can think of a story from their own life. That's even better if they can, where they've come across one of these fallacies. I do talk to my students about this, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, because it can be hard to recall. So in those cases, they can just write fictional stories. But then I hope that they'll be able to recognize them when they encounter them in the future, and then remember, oh, here's an example of that fallacy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
a great approach, because you get to work with real life events
Yeah.
that must give an additional impact to your learning skills.
Yeah. And you've given me some ideas with your example that there could be a project where you analyze studies, but that would be for older kids. That would be for teenagers, probably, maybe even older teenagers, because those, you know what, though, you could write I could write like a fake study. I'm thinking you're giving me ideas, like a simple study, because reading real scientific studies with the terminology and just the length and everything is totally unrealistic for kids, and I think even probably for the younger teenagers. Um, but maybe like a study that follows the same sort of structure, but uses simpler language, and they could analyze it. So they could look for things like sample size and all that kind of stuff. That's a pretty good idea.
From my own experience, I learned a lot this way, and without noticing it. So it came so naturally that I didn't notice that I was learning critical thinking or independent
Ah,
thinking or analytical thinking. It's just I did it and I loved
yeah,
it. But for other people, it might be requires too much patience, and they want to solve the issue immediately. And so
yeah.
it might also be something that needs to be assessed at the moment if it fits the crowd.
That it's actually interesting you bring up the word patience, because that does seem to be a key part of critical thinking too, because it's a big part of it is not making snap judgments, right? And stepping back, taking your time, thinking things through. Sometimes it can take a while. Some of the probability puzzles I've posted on social media, I got a lot of pushback from people arguing against me a lot that the answer I gave was wrong. And then sometimes it was days later they came back and they said, "Oh, I got it now." And I thought, wow, that kind of patience because some of I like to post problems that are the answers are against our intuition. So that's why, I get a lot of pushback expectedly to those puzzles. But then there's some people that are willing to think and think and think and consider it and think in all different ways, and think, yeah, slowly and carefully, they can come to the right answer in the end. So that's a really good example of critical thinking at work, but it does take some patience sometimes.
I'm guessing that we're lacking patience more and more now with
Yeah.
this in a fast-paced, online society. I would also be interested, even though I know you work with children and have been doing that for a while. That's your area of expertise. But what is your opinion about critical thinking among the general public? Is it something that we should be worried about now? Do we see improvements? If you think that the current level is limited, so why is this the case, and how can we improve it?
Okay. Yeah, I do think it needs some improving. As I mentioned, most of us weren't taught it in school at all, which is, I think, a big part of it. So you can see it. I mean, I mentioned the comment sections a lot, right? You don't have to spend long in the comment sections to see logical fallacies, or even like just watching influencers talking about stuff. They all commit a lot of logical fallacies in some of their videos or memes. You find logical fallacies in memes all the time. I posted about a margarine meme that said, margarine shares 27 ingredients with paint and is one molecule away from plastic. Bon appetit. Yeah. Uh, so, yeah, you come across fallacies everywhere. That's why this is like the first thing that I had in mind to teach. But then another thing I see a lot is evolution is just a theory. Do you see that too?
I just
Everywhere.
posted a video about it this
Did you?
week,
Oh, I
actually.
missed that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Okay.
I got
Yeah.
a lot
Okay.
of comments about
That's
it.
so good. I don't know if it's happening more lately or I'm just seeing it more. Um, but this is, yeah, people don't know what a theory is scientifically, right? So, yeah, that's another example of science literacy. I just see everywhere on social media the need for more critical thinking. And for that, I would recommend, well, of course, people should be watching your YouTube channel to learn more about that. And also, Thinking is Power. Thinkingispower.com has so much good stuff about fallacies, biases, and science literacy for adults. So I
Yeah, I have to
recommend
add.
everyone check it out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I like with thinking is power, the not only do you learn a lot about these fallacies, I find that the approach that Melanie is
Melanie,
her
yeah.
name, right? She has um, is very sound. At least I feel she doesn't pick necessarily a camp and stick to that thing, and everybody else is, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's a very sound approach to it, and welcoming approach. So even if
Yes.
you don't necessarily agree with her immediately, you at least she makes you think about it at least.
Well, she intentionally doesn't approach hot topics. Um, and she advised me early on when I was just getting started on social media to do the same. Um, and I've been pretty much following her advice, although still people will get upset anyway. It's really, I find it quite challenging not to upset people, even with things that I think are quite non-polarizing, non-controversial. Just comes with being on social media. But I thought that was really good advice she gave me, because if you trigger people, they won't listen. She said something like that. So, you know, if I know some people, they do want to use their social media platforms to try to share certain points of views on hot topics, but I think for our mission, it's better to try not to trigger people as much as possible.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. You mentioned evolution theory before, and like I said, I created a video about it
Hmm.
because, and the reason why people are talking about it now, I think one of the reasons right
Yeah.
now is because Tucker Carlson, a U.S. political
Yeah.
commentator,
Yeah.
went on Joe Rogan and basically was undermining evolution because it was still just a theory.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. I felt the need of kind of communicating that fine, it's just a theory, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That angle to that discussion is sometimes something that we don't bring up
Hmm.
much. The fact that it's a good thing that is a theory, just a theory, because the opposite of that would be that it's a dogma or a doctrine, something that we just need to accept. But
Yeah.
the fact that it is a theory points to the humility of science because it creates an environment where I can still challenge. If I
Yeah.
have evidence enough, I can still challenge bits and pieces, and that's how we build new knowledge. So
Yeah.
go on, keep on researching because we haven't reached the final truth about everything. And then you get pushback from both sides in a way that for me was new. Like why, it's not obvious to me that everybody knows that it's a theory and why a theory is good. How so it's a tough situation either way. So
Yeah.
like you said, you don't think that it's a hot topic, but still it becomes
Yeah.
kind of
Oh,
a
yeah.
trigger point, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's a good example of equivocation too, because that's when you use a word in a misleading way or in like kind of in two ways at once to try to confuse people. And so when they're saying it's just a theory, they're implying that it's just a guess. They're using like the colloquial meaning of theory. And I'm not sure they even really know what a theory is in science. I don't know if they're intentionally skewing the word, like misleading people with the word, or they actually don't know what a theory is. It might be a bit of both.
Yeah, I think you will
Yeah.
find people on both sides of that spectrum. I think
Yeah.
most people just genuinely don't know
Yeah.
why it's called just a theory because we use theory very loosely in our
Hmm.
everyday life, like
Yeah.
our theory of how Game of Thrones will end, or
Yeah.
a theory, which is based on nothing more than your inner thoughts. So
Yeah.
I think that's also a misconception, but
Yeah.
people don't understand it.
Yeah.
We can approach hot topics from time to time and try to digest them, and but as long as we do it in a respectful manner, we don't put people down, we don't laugh at them, and we don't point fingers. We can highlight issues, understand and accept that there are misconceptions there, and how can we fix that in an approachable way. And I think people would respect that. Yes, you will receive pushback, you will receive a lot of hate, negative comments as well,
Mhm.
but I mean, that's online life, I guess. That's what I'm
Yeah,
experiencing at least.
online, yeah, it happens. On my website, I'm trying very, very hard to to not give any to side with any sort of issues because I want parents of religious and atheists and all different parents to feel comfortable with their kids taking the course and not be worried, they're getting brainwashed or getting manipulated or something like that. But yeah, on social media, when you're posting a lot of things, yeah, I think it's inevitable you will sometimes touch on some hot topics. Yeah.
Inevitable.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I think your questions covered everything really well. So I'll just send you the resources I wanted to recommend after so I don't say the name of a book wrong or something like that. I'll just check that all and you can put that in the notes. But yeah, that's it. So you already mentioned my social media is at Critikid. My website's critikid.com. My social media is more for adults or for 13 plus, but it might have stuff you want to show your kids. And then the website right now has stuff for ages 8 to 18. And as you mentioned, sometimes adults enjoy it too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I can highly recommend the Instagram
Thank
and
you.
your videos in general are entertaining. So great. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. It was a great conversation, and I hope we can do it more in the future.
Yeah, I
And
hope so too.
yeah, I wish you good luck with all your projects.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.